In this video, we'll go over the risk management process. Depending on the risk practitioner that you ask, some may mention a 4-step process, others may mention a 5-step process. But if you analyze the two, they more or less speak about the same thing and are used in basically all the risk management frameworks. So the first thing is just to understand the process flow, which involves identifying the risk, analyzing, assessing, controlling, and monitoring. In some frameworks, or at the most basic level, you'll just find somebody mentioning identification, assessment, control, and monitoring. But in my experience as a risk manager, this 5-step process just easily outlines all the key building blocks of a risk management framework. Now let's break down each of the factors one by one. Identify. Identification just means naming, categorizing, and understanding your risks. This means scanning both your internal operations as well as the external environment in which your organization operates in, just to pinpoint potential threats. In the previous video, we had mentioned the external sources of risk as well as internal sources of risk. Now, by understanding that, you can be able now to just pinpoint what is likely to go wrong and impact you directly as an organization. And for risk management, it's unique because the oversight part is typically done by a different entity from the risk owners. So it does need a lot of collaboration. You just talking to the business line if you're a risk manager, and you'd find that the risk managers who've had that opportunity to work in the front line tend to have an advantage when it comes just to the overall understanding of the risk, as opposed to those ones who haven't had that opportunity to interact or work at the front line with the actual day-to-day business that leads now to the emergence of the risks that we seek now to basically control and manage in a risk management framework. So think of things like system failures, the credit default, cyber attacks, market volatility, which mostly apply to financial services industry, but risk cuts across all industries, regardless of the industry you're in. I'm sure that as an organization, you can be faced with both internal and external sources of risk, which need first to be identified before you can manage them. So brainstorming, just ensuring that there's stakeholder engagement. These are all ways of just being able to identify the risks and now being able to clearly name them, categorize them, and understand them. The next step is analysis or analyzing the risks, which now involves ranking, scoring, measuring, and quantifying, which just means understanding the actual source and nature and the potential impact. So you look at causes and consequences and how the risks could manifest and what might trigger them and where it could hurt the most. So is it a process thing? Is it a people thing? Or is it a system thing? Or will a certain external event lead now to the rising of these specific risks? So the analysis part, you will need to engage the stakeholders if you are just carrying out that risk management process. So for risk, it's a very social practice. You can't do it in silos, and it's highly recommended for close collaborations across teams, just to be able to clearly identify and also analyze risks in a productive way. The next step will be to assess, where now you look at the effects, the knock-ons and repercussions, and this now involves just measuring the likelihood and potential impact. And here now you will be able to rank and prioritize the risks using tools like heatmaps, risk matrices, your risk registers, or evaluate risk models. And this step just helps you now know where to narrow your focus, because as much as some risks will be identified, not all of them are worth being mitigated, just given that all or most organizations have limited resources that they can direct to risk management. So it's important just to get value for money by focusing on the most important and sensitive risks that need to be managed. So here again, as a risk professional, it is advisable to engage the front line and just work together to ensure that risks that have the highest impact are the ones that are controlled, and the lower risks, those ones can at least be ranked and mitigated just based on their urgency. The next part now will be controlling, which can either avoid, retain, mitigate, and transfer depending on your organization and what you specialize in. Now, this will tie in also with the company strategy, and you might seek to avoid the risk altogether or reduce it through controls or diversification. You can also transfer it via insurance or just accept it within your risk appetite. And in the next video, we will be defining these key risk terms, the risk appetites, risk statements, and all that. But here now, for controlling, it's the same as managing. What do you want to do with those risks, and how are you going to protect yourself as a company from being adversely affected by these specific risks? So again, this one also needs a lot of stakeholder engagement, especially if you're going to need to deploy resources in form of funds and the likes for insurance that costs money, and also deciding which risks you're going to accept and just move on with, and just actively track just to ensure that they don't get out of hand. Now, lastly is monitoring, which involves tracking, reporting, and escalating. This is now where you track the key risk indicators that we identified in the previous steps. And here now, you also need to deploy your internal controls and review how effective they have been, and also escalate when things go off track. So for most organizations, where you have the business line, then you have the second line of defense being the risk function. The risk function will be in charge of that review and reporting now to the board. So risk tends to act as a bridge now between the day-to-day running of the business as well as the board, just by providing board with that oversight and the data that they need to make active and meaningful decisions. So here it's all about monitoring and just giving life to that framework by actually requiring decisions to be made based on certain events that may have occurred. So if there are breaches, it's the responsibility of a risk manager to ensure that those breaches are reported to the board and are also escalated to management, and they are actively tracked to ensure that they are closed or mitigated within the shortest time possible. So we've come to the end of the video, and in conclusion, for your risks, you just need to identify, analyze, assess, control, and monitor. And this is a continuous process which has to be done with stakeholder engagement, so it cannot be done in a silo. And thank you guys for watching. I'll catch you in the next video. Be sure to like and subscribe. Bye for now.